On to our next speaker. Initially, I thought I was the best dressed person here today, but I have officially been dethroned by none other than ABSA, CIB, Ways of Work lead. It is Elanor Beattie. Look at her, look at her. Have fun, ma'am.
I have a name for this dress. Can anyone guess what it is? ABSA, where are you guys? Can you guess what it is? That's it. Africanacity. It's ABSA's word for tenacity with African roots. Today's talk is going to be about soil and seeds. When I told my partner that the title was The Soil Before the Seeds, he looked at me like, but you kill every plant in our house. Are there any gardeners out there? I'm not one of them, but there's only a few, so I feel good. Right, but helping organizations in growing strategic outcomes, I've realized that my work and gardening have far more in common than I should probably admit to my boss. Because whether you're growing tomatoes or trying to grow OKRs, anyone try to grow OKRs in their organization? Only one. Come on. No. I'm going to have to explain those just now to you. One lesson, though, keeps proving itself. If the soil isn't ready, the seeds don't matter. Most organizations have a strategy on a page, right? And a balanced scorecard, and a set of strategic priorities. But how do you know if your strategy is failing right now? Your CEO might rattle off the financial results at the end of the year, and that probably tells you whether your strategy was a success or not. But how do you know if your strategy is failing right now in real time? Not at the end of the quarter or the end of the year, right now. If you asked your execution teams what the strategy is, yeah, they'll know. They'll tell you what it is. But if you ask them how their today's work is moving tomorrow's strategy, if you ask them which part of their daily delivery is improving client experience or generating revenue uplift, there would likely be a long silence. And that silence is what this talk is about. We measure many things: outputs, activity, deadlines, and budgets. But we rarely measure the thing that matters most, whether that strategy on a page is actually happening on the ground. My hypothesis is simple. Execution is the ultimate strategy. And to explain why, I'm going to tell you a little story. You know, ABSA is all about stories. Your story matters. My story is kind of about all the rebels in ABSA. All those executives that smuggled real thought leadership into a bank that's pretty risk-averse, and they challenged conventional thinking. It's about the practitioners who experimented when success was not guaranteed. And it's about my army of coaches, and they took hard knocks on the execution line. Since the story is about soil and seeds, and maybe gardeners and farmers, we're going to need a few characters. So stick with me. The landlords, they're those guys that own the farm, and they only want a harvest at the end of the season. And then you get the growers. They have hands in the dirty soil. They are the ones that actually make anything grow. And then in between, you get the head gardeners. They kind of feel the failed crops. Now, oh, and me. Me, I'm the head gardener. I've been at ABSA for 13 years. I've been growing crops of ways of work transformation for 6 years in CIB, corporate and investment banking. But listen closely, because this is not just our story. This is your story too. The story begins back in 2019. The ABSA Barclays divestment, which was worth 12 billion rand, if anyone's asking for a receipt, that taught us to deliver outputs at scale. Our execution teams were brilliant at like-for-like replacements, and they were well-oiled feature factories. But stepping into our refreshed ABSA brand and embracing our ambitious strategy to be the Pan-African leader, a different challenge lay ahead. We had to get great at landing business outcomes, and we had to land those outcomes fast. So, like many organizations, we turned to OKRs, objectives and key results, because the promise was compelling. Alignment, focus, transparency, stretch, and stretch again. Say those 4 words in a boardroom and everybody nods. But 70% of organizations say they've adopted them, and only 23% say they delivered on their promise. Nevertheless, we embraced OKRs with all the Africanacity that we could muster up. ABSA, are you still there? Yeah. We had the vision, we had the sponsorship, we bought the tooling, and we had the coaching. We were expecting alignment and stretch. To be fair, OKR showed promise initially at the strategic layer, but they were very, very lost in translation at the execution layer. It seems there's a difference between planting seeds and actually growing something. And we'd stumbled on our first anti-pattern. We just might have been trying to plant seeds into unprepared soil. A key shift in my thinking was that OKRs are not a methodology. You simply just don't install them. They're a framework that depends deeply on the environment around them. One team ran what looked like a textbook OKR crafting session. We had thoughtful objectives and measurable key results. The logic was sound. On the artifact alone, you would have said, strategy is alive and it's well. The OKRs failed before the workshop even ended. Why? Psychological safety was low. We had high directive from leadership, and people weren't comfortable speaking honestly about failure. In that context, the OKR couldn't become a mechanism for strategy. It became theater. If planting seeds into unprepared soil was weed number 1, then mandating them was weed number 2. When the invitation to OKRs was turned down, we turned to stronger incentives, more governance, more reporting, more mandatory participation. I was one of those leaders. There's a certain irony in trying to create empowerment through compliance. It created motion, yes, but motion is not the same as commitment. Weed number 2 was right on schedule. By mandating compliance, we had killed commitment. Now I want to say, meantime, on a farm far, far away, another way of working was beginning to take root. It was built on the Kanban method, and we at ABSA called it flow. It's not the same flow as the Capitec guy before me was talking about. Ours is much more exciting. This term for flow was related to the flow of value moving through the organization, and like water, moving through a riverbed. The work or the value is the water, and the impediments are the boulders. Flow gave teams a practical, data-led way to see how work moves through their systems, and it was regardless of any methodologies, tools, or processes. Scrum, Waterfall, Jira boards, even a client onboarding process, Flow can overlay them all. We introduced only 5 flow metrics. Throughput, telling us how much value is moving through the system. Lead time, from start to finish, the time it takes to complete each item of value. Work in progress and work in progress aging, how many items of value teams are juggling at any one time, and how long value has been standing. And the last one is flow efficiency, a factor of active and waiting value. Now, these flow metrics eliminate any guesswork. There's a certain precision to them. Teams can make promises to their stakeholders that they will land value, for example, in exactly 39 days and exactly 85% of the time. Enough specificity to become predictable. Predictability is one of the most underrated capabilities in business. It's not glamorous, but a team that can commit to a date and be right is quietly revolutionary. Predictability builds trust, and trust builds demand, and demand builds momentum. The beauty of flow, and why I'm so passionate about it, is that it starts where teams are at. It favors small, incremental improvements over disruptive ones, and it lets acts of leadership come from anywhere in the team. We established an ABSA version of the Kanban maturity model, it's very complicated. This one is a lot more simple, and we called it the ABSA Flow Maturity Ladder. It's a simple set of levels just from 1 to 6, and we named it a ladder because teams can climb up the ladder of maturity, but they can also regress back down to lower levels of maturity, for example, if they're impacted by structural changes. Each level is defined by a set of values, principles, and practices. Flow primes the cultural value system and beneath the practices, and plants the practices in a very deliberate sequence. Our army of flow coaches embrace the mantra. Outcomes follow practices, practices follow culture, culture follows values, so what do? You lead with values. The first values to take root at level 1 and 2 sound like the simplest, but we've heard about them today: transparency and collaboration. Teams trusting each other enough to put all their work on a board, even that side of desk kind of stuff, where everyone can see it. Once a board is trusted, a new value emerges, and that's called flow. At level 3, teams are establishing the flow, metric data points and trends, and they start seeing their workflows through the lens of data. At level 4, teams stabilize and can predict delivery dates. At level 5, teams start optimizing their workflows, and now they start chasing delivery at speed and efficiency. With efficiency nailed, they start asking the question, what am I delivering, and who am I delivering it for? Is it any good to anyone? Ta-da, this is where OKRs land best. Level 6, teams are truly outward-facing and outcome-driven, and there's a genuine focus on the customer, and that's where the magic starts to happen. What we learned is practices introduced too early are simply an overburden on the team, and that patience is a strategic advantage. Some of our teams took as much as 18 months to get to level 3. Enter weed number 3, rushing the climb. Embedded coaching, starting where teams are at and allowing values to lead. These take time, but the payoff is sustainable change. So we learned not to rush the climb. Now we're 4 years into our story, and OKRs had taken root at the business, and flow had just started taking root in the execution layer. But despite introducing OKRs and flow, we still had a gap. We still had that elusive gap between strategy and execution. In between the vision of the landowner at the top and the growers tending to the seedlings on the ground, there was still a gap. OKRs were meant to bridge this gap, but they didn't. Despite all our change efforts, many delivery teams in that execution layer had never even heard of OKRs. At this stage of the story, we had a problem every gardener knows. We had healthy soil, we had good seedlings, and still no harvest to show the landowner. So we called on John Smart and his team, a global consulting company. They were named Sooner, Safer, Happier. The first thing they did was walk our garden and point out all the weeds we had stopped noticing. Local optimization, watermelon status reporting, headless chickens, and we had so many seeds in the ground that nothing had room to grow. His answer wasn't plant less, it was stop starting and start finishing. John didn't hand us a new set of seeds, he handed us a lens. He said, stop chasing frameworks and start chasing outcomes. And that's when better value, sooner, safer, happier landed for us. Suddenly, we had focus. We weren't just planting foster anymore. We were finally asking, is any of this actually good to eat? So Flow gave us speed with discipline. OKRs gave us intent. And now, better value, sooner, safer, happier gave us focus and an outcomes lens. 5 years into our journey, the soil was finally fertile, and fertile enough for our first harvest. Flow had taken root in about 15 to 20% of our teams, not the whole farm, but enough to start telling a real story about sooner, at least, and safer and happier a little bit. We kept it simple for Exco. We focused on 2 metrics only, throughput and lead time. To create some perspective, imagine 1 billion rand investment into strategic execution. That 10% efficiency starts looking like 100 million rand in savings. I know it's rough maths, but you get the drift. Imagine a team delivering 25% more. In theory, they could lose a quarter of their members and still bring in the same crop, more with less. This was meaningful. So naturally, we did what any proud gardener does with their first tomato of the season. We held it up for everyone to see. Exco got the boardroom version, and our Mavericks shared their experience with glee to their peers in the conversation cafes. We couldn't yet draw a straight line from sooner to actual value, but customer experience was nudging up, and that was enough of a signal for us to keep watering. We now face the challenge of scaling. We'd nailed it, but we needed to scale it. And John's team pointed us to the diffusion of innovations curve. This curve was mapped out by a guy called Everett Rogers back in 1962, and so if it's still around, it must be pretty good. On the left, the innovators and the early adopters together are your first 16% of any population. The majority then make up the next 34%, and then you have those laggards on the right-hand side there. They bring up the rear. Give the innovators scarcity. Give them, you get to try this before anyone else. It's like those crazy Star Wars people and that. And they're in. Our first harvest happened because Flow had attracted our innovators, the squads who experimented with Flow just because they love to experience things first. After the first 16 comes that thing in the middle there called the chasm. It's a gap. And Geoffrey Moore, it took him 30 years, but he called it the chasm. To attract the majority, you need something different to scarcity. The majority don't care about being first. What they care about is it has worked for someone else, and the field looks exactly like their field. So to create demand from the majority, you need social proof. Do you see now why we held our tomato up for all to see? We let the success of the first harvest do the convincing. We gave the majority the proof that they so needed, and then we embraced the principle, invite over inflict. Adoption accelerated. We stopped coercing teams to change. We created conditions where innovators could thrive and tell their stories, and that's how we crossed the chasm, across to the majority. Well, mostly. It turns out you can't diffuse your way through a bank where compliance is key to survival. So we did create some structures. We created a trellis, something a plant can climb. The trellis was made up of lean governance and minimum standards and real enabling structures. We created a ways of work center of enablement. We created a value realization office, and of course a product office, and adoption scaled. 6 years ago, we didn't even know what a healthy field looked like. Last month, we walked into Exco and we showed them our second harvest. More than 100 squads now brag that they are at ABSA flow level 3 or above. That's 65% of our whole portfolio. We've crossed the chasm between the innovators and the majority, thanks to Rogers and Moore, and we've crossed the chasm between the OKRs and flow. I think I might take some credit for that one. And these beautiful green arrows here, they held through some of the most significant environmental impacts we've had. We are able to see correlations now between events such as seasonal volatility and portfolio performance, cause sitting next to effect. This is not just a harvest, this is a forecast. We now have a stable, predictable, sustainable performance system. The golden thread. Somebody, I think it was Asim, was talking about a steel thread. Again, my thread's much better. The golden thread of value. Going back to ABSA's original need to deliver business outcomes at speed, our field needs one more thing, and that's the golden thread of value. It's where flow and strategy finally meet. A golden thread of value linking execution to strategy. Strategy sets the direction. OKRs name the outcomes we're reaching for. Product discovery works out what's worth growing. And flow, well, that gets value into our clients' hands, and then voila, outcomes realized and measurable impact. The golden thread of value is not an abstract picture anymore. We're sitting on over 1,000 OKR measures today, cascading right from strategy all the way down into delivery, and each one links back to our balanced scorecard. Damn, we still have the laggards to conquer, but our dream is that the golden thread of value gives every team a feedback loop they never had before, so that they can confidently tell the story of how their daily work is moving the dial on strategy. Whatever outcomes lens we may choose, the metrics are not only the spine of the golden thread, but they are the gold itself. And finally, we can stop plowing that data field manually. And I have one more character to add, of course. Her name is AI. She's the farmer. With our data as the gold and ways of work defining the purity, and AI now enabling incredible insights, our performance delivery and strategy realization come together in a powerful way. Second last slide, getting to the end. Remember the anti-patterns. Number 1, planting seeds before preparing the soil. Remember to lead with values. Mandating compliance and killing commitment. Remember to balance invite over inflict with structures for sustainability. And remember, don't rush the climb. In closing, you don't need a new strategy. What you need is fertile ground. Frameworks alone, we know this, they don't deliver. It takes the right soil, the right timing, the right sequence, the right support, and of course, a bunch of rebels willing to stand in the field long enough to see it through. What you need is a golden thread of value from your stable, predictable, and sustainable performance system right the way through to your strategy on a page. And now you know exactly what I mean when I say the soil before the seeds. And because if execution is the ultimate strategy, then I'll leave you with this one question. How fertile is your soil? Thank you. Thank you.